They looked down on her accent, but she was the investor they were waiting for. Amara held her notebook tightly as she stepped into the tall glass building in the center of London. The walls stretched high, polished, and intimidating, like they were built only for a certain kind of people, the kind of people who spoke perfect English with polished accents and never seemed to struggle for air when talking. She had been invited to this meeting after weeks of emails and screening processes. The company, Bright Tech, was a rising star in the world of artificial intelligence. Everyone was talking about their new product, and they were desperate for investors. Amara knew this. What they didn't know was that she was exactly what they were looking for. But as she stepped into the large conference room, she felt eyes scan her from head to toe. Tall men in sharp suits sat around a long mahogany table. Their watches shined, their pens clicked, and their voices floated in the air like smooth radio hosts. She noticed some of them, staring not at her clothes, which were simple but elegant, not at her shoes, polished but not flashy, but at her face. The moment she opened her mouth to greet them, she saw it happen. "Good afternoon, everyone," she said in her Nigerian accent, clear and steady. Their smiles faltered. One man coughed into his fist, another raised an eyebrow, and a young assistant at the corner gave a small chuckle she thought she didn't hear. She heard it. Her accent. That was the problem. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't polished enough. But Amara only smiled politely, lifted her chin, and sat down. If only they knew who they were dealing with. The presentation began. The CEO of Bright Tech, a slim man named Edward, clicked through slides, speaking quickly with that confident British flow that sounded like music. He talked about funding, future growth, and market expansion. His tone carried pride, but underneath it was something else, desperation. Amara caught it. She always did. Years of being in boardrooms and negotiations had sharpened her ears. She could tell when someone was selling hope instead of results. But the men around her, they thought she didn't belong. "So, Miss Amara, was it?" one of the directors asked during the break. He pronounced her name wrongly, dragging the air like it was too heavy for his tongue. "And what brings you here today? Tourism, business seminar?" There were chuckles. Amara smiled. "I'm here for the same reason you are, business." The director raised an eyebrow. "Business? Interesting. And what sector is it again that you dabble in?" The way he said dabble stung, but she kept her cool. Energy, real estate, and most recently, tech. That caught their attention. Some leaned forward, though still skeptical. Another man, tall with a square jaw, spoke. "Tech. From Nigeria?" The room grew quiet. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said it. Like Nigeria and tech were two things that didn't belong together. Like the idea was laughable. "Yes," Amara said calmly. "From Nigeria, where some of the fastest-growing tech companies in Africa are being built. You'd be surprised at what's happening outside this room." The young assistant in the corner laughed under his breath again, quickly hiding behind his laptop. Edward, the CEO, tried to cover the awkwardness with a smile. "Well, we are always happy to welcome new perspectives." Perspectives. Another word that really meant we don't take you seriously. Amara sat quietly, observing them. Let them laugh. Let them look down on her accent. She wasn't here to beg. She was here to decide if they were worth her money. As the meeting dragged on, Amara's mind drifted. She had felt this way before, looked down on, underestimated, treated as if she had nothing to offer. It had started years ago when she first moved to London for her studies. She remembered standing in front of her classmates, presenting a project with all the confidence she could gather. She had researched deeply, written carefully, and prepared like her life depended on it. But the moment she spoke, she saw it again, the smirks, the exchanged looks, the quiet laughter. One classmate had whispered loudly enough for her to hear, "Her English sounds funny. Can't they teach them properly over there?" She went home that day, locked herself in her tiny apartment, and cried until her chest hurt. She thought of quitting, thought of going back home where at least people understood her without judgment. But she didn't quit. Instead, she worked harder. She sharpened her mind, not her accent. She built knowledge so deep that no laughter could erase it. And when she finally graduated top of her class, she realized something. Intelligence needs no accent. Now, sitting in this boardroom, she remembered that pain, but this time she wasn't the same girl. This time she had power, and soon they would see it. The second half of the meeting was supposed to be a question and answer session with potential investors. One by one, people in the room asked sharp, intelligent-sounding questions about Brightech's business model. How do you plan to scale internationally? What's your 5-year projection? Who are your biggest competitors? Edward and his team answered confidently, sometimes too confidently. When it was Amara's turn, she spoke slowly, not rushing her words. Your model depends heavily on rapid user growth, but your cost of acquiring new customers is rising each quarter. If your burn rate continues, you'll run out of capital in less than a year. What's your plan for sustainability? The room went silent. It wasn't just her accent this time. It was her question. It cut straight into the weak spot they had been trying to hide under fancy slides and bright graphs. Edward adjusted his tie, clearly caught off guard. Well, we are working on reducing that through partnerships and improved marketing strategies. Amara nodded gently. Partnerships sound good. But who exactly are these partners? And what leverage do you have to keep costs down while expanding globally? The directors shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at Amara, realizing she wasn't just another visitor trying to look important. She knew what she was saying. Edward gave a weak smile. We're still finalizing discussions. Confidential at this stage. Amara leaned back in her chair, her notebook resting calmly on the table. She didn't press further. She didn't need to. She had already seen through them. And for the first time that day, it wasn't her accent they were noticing. It was her mind. During the coffee break, Amara stepped aside near the large windows overlooking the city. She sipped her tea, calm and unbothered. But across the room, the whispers began. Who is she, really? She's sharp. Did you hear that question? Still, I doubt she has the kind of money we're looking for. Maybe she's just here to look important. They whispered like children at the back of a classroom. One director, the same man who had mocked her earlier, walked up to her with a fake smile plastered across his face. So, Amara, tell me, what exactly is your background? I mean, in terms of real investment. She looked at him with polite eyes. I've invested in multiple companies across Africa, Asia, and most recently in Europe. Some of them are now valued in the hundreds of millions. The man raised his brows, amused. Hundreds of millions? Interesting. He said it like he didn't believe a word. But Amara didn't argue. She had learned long ago that true power doesn't announce itself. It shows itself at the right time. Still, his words lingered. These men thought wealth had only one accent, one skin tone, one country. How wrong they were. The meeting finally ended with Edward thanking everyone for attending. He promised to follow up with investors individually, hoping for commitments. Most of the directors shook hands, exchanged cards, and left quickly, but Amara stayed seated. Edward approached her, still wearing his smooth smile. Thank you for coming, Miss Amara. We truly value diverse perspectives. There it was again, that word. Diverse. It sounded less like respect, and more like pity. Amara stood up and met his eyes. Edward, let me be clear. I didn't come here for your pity. I came here to decide if your company deserves my investment. Edward blinked, surprised. Your investment? She reached into her bag and placed a file on the table. Inside were documents, proof of her holdings, investments, and a global fund she managed. He flipped through them, his face changing with every page. The room grew silent. Even the young assistant in the corner peeked curiously, his eyes widening. Amara continued, her voice steady. I represent a private investment group with access to over $500 million in funds. I came here to see if Brightech was worth it. Unfortunately, she paused, letting the silence burn. Your numbers don't add up. You're growing, but you're leaking. And no matter how polished the accent, no investor with sense will throw money into a leaking bucket. Edward's mouth opened, but no words came out. The directors stared in shock. The same men who had smirked at her accent now sat frozen, realizing the truth. She wasn't a tourist. She wasn't dabbling. She was the investor they had been waiting for. For a moment, the conference room was still. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Edward looked down at the documents again. His face had lost all its color. He had walked into this meeting expecting investors to beg for a chance at his golden project. Instead, it was his company that had been stripped bare. One of the directors, the square-jawed man who had sneered earlier, leaned forward, trying to recover. "Well, Miss Amara, I must say this is impressive. Very impressive." His voice shook slightly, betraying his nerves. Amara turned to him calmly. "A few minutes ago, you were laughing at my accent. Now suddenly you find me impressive?" The man's face tightened. Well, I didn't mean—" Amara held up her hand. "Save it. I've seen this before. People like you measure intelligence by how polished someone sounds. But accents are just music, different rhythms, different tones. They don't tell you what a person knows. They don't tell you what a person is worth." The young assistant in the corner swallowed hard, guilt written all over his face. He avoided her gaze. Edward finally spoke. "Miss Amara, I think there may have been some misunderstanding earlier." Amara smiled faintly. "No misunderstanding. You saw me as small. You judged me before you even knew me. But here's the irony. I was ready to write you a check today. I came here prepared to invest millions. Now, I'm not so sure anymore." The words hit the room like thunder. Edward and his team scrambled. They had spent months chasing investors, only to realize the most powerful one in the room was the very person they dismissed. "Miss Amara," Edward said quickly, "if we came across as disrespectful, please accept our apologies. That was never the intention. We truly value diversity." "There's that word again," Amara cut in, her voice sharper now. "Diversity. You throw it around like it's decoration. But true diversity isn't just inviting someone into the room. It's listening when they speak. It's respecting them even if they sound different from you." The directors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Amara's eyes swept the table. "Do you know what it took for me to be here today? Do you know how many times I've been laughed at, dismissed, underestimated, simply because I don't sound like you? Too many times. But every single time, I turned that disrespect into fuel. That's why I'm standing here today as the investor you need. Not the other way around." The square-jawed man cleared his throat. "Well, perhaps we judged too quickly." Amara tilted her head. "Perhaps? No, you did judge. You looked down on me. Let's call it what it is. The problem is not my accent. The problem is your arrogance." Her words hung heavy in the air. Nobody dared to reply. Then she gathered her notebook, slid it into her bag, and stood up. "I'll think about your company. But let me be clear, if I do invest, it won't be because of your smooth speeches. It'll be because I believe in the product. And if I don't, it'll be because of the way you treated me today." She looked straight at Edward. "Learn this lesson well. The person you look down on might be the very person you need." And with that, she walked toward the door. The sound of her heels against the marble floor echoed through the silence. Behind her, the men who had once mocked her accent now scrambled in whispers. "Edward, we can't lose her. She has $500 million in access. What do we do?" Edward rushed after her. "Miss Amara, please wait. Let's talk." She stopped at the doorway and turned slowly, her calm face betraying none of the fire inside her. "I'll be in touch," she said simply. "But next time when someone walks into this room with an accent different from yours, remember this moment before you laugh. Respect costs nothing. Disrespect, on the other hand, might cost you everything." Edward swallowed, nodding quickly like a student scolded by a teacher. Amara gave him one last look, then walked out. As the doors closed behind her, she felt the weight of years lifting off her shoulders. All those times people had mocked her speech, all those nights she had cried in silence, they had led to this moment. She didn't need to change her accent to be respected. She just needed to remind the world, power has many voices. Outside, the city stretched wide and alive. Cars rushed, people moved, and the air was thick with noise. Amara stepped into her black car waiting at the curb. Her driver opened the door, and she slid inside. "Back to the hotel, ma'am?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. Then, with a small smile, back to the hotel, and then maybe to the next company that truly deserves my money. As the car pulled away, she leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, "They looked down on my accent, but today they learned the truth. I am the investor they were waiting for."